Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Grant. I'm the Director of Industry Insights for Retail and Consumer Goods at Salesforce. So before I dive in, I want to tell you where this data comes from. So Salesforce Commerce Cloud powers over 2,000, 5,000, a lot of websites around the world. And we're able to see all of the data that happens on the websites, the transactions, the sales, the payment methods, traffic referrals, lots of different information. And as Josh pointed out on the module, there are public resources for you to use to benchmark your business against what we're seeing. So I'm going to walk us through some key data points on what we're seeing globally, excluding the US, in e-commerce. Now, this is not a holistic view of e-commerce, right? It's only websites that are using Commerce Cloud. So we're going to give you a sneak peek of what's happening at a corner of the internet when it comes to e-commerce. But I hope you use this data to understand what sort of environment you're getting into, what sort of metrics to expect when you do start to sell internationally, so that you can benchmark your own business against what we see happening around the world, excluding the US. So the first headline is that, according to us, e-commerce sales declined by 10% in 2022, and you can see the declines by quarter down here. The Q2 and Q3 were the worst, but Q4 sort of rebounded in that it didn't decline as much. And there's two factors behind this. One is this is the first year that globally non-retail stores weren't shut down. So in Europe and in Australasia, because of Omicron during the winter season, they closed non-retail for parts of the year. Well, now everything's back open and has been, so you're competing against stores again when it comes to e-commerce. The second issue is the macroeconomic headwinds we're all facing are particularly bad in Europe. The war in Ukraine, the high rates of inflation, there were energy issues. So the customers in general abroad are under a lot more macroeconomic pressure than we saw that we're here in the US. So the consumer is much more price sensitive and is pulling back on discretionary spending. So if we move to the next slide, I'll talk about the fact that it also varies by vertical as far as performance goes. So you can see general handbags, luxury handbags, furniture, general footwear, and luxury apparel actually did see growth in 2022 globally. As we got back out, returned to office, started traveling again, took up more sports, we do see consumers willing to spend in those types of merchandise categories. And these categories are also seeing a bigger shift of e-commerce penetration overall. So when non-essential retail closed, people bought these items online, and that habit is sticking. So there's two functions: one, the need for these actual products, and then these categories are seeing greater rates of e-commerce adoptions. The ones on the right that have seen really low or actually dramatic declines in e-commerce are again, sort of the reverse. We are not needing as much of this product. We went home, we stocked up on all the toys and learning that we needed. Same with appliances, and that's a longer replenishment cycle. So there's this aspect of we don't need any more of these products. And in the case of like food and beverage, right, we saw a huge uptick in online grocery, and that's just something that wasn't sustainable as grocery stores sort of expanded their hours of operation again, and people weren't comfortable going in. So if we go to the next slide, the interesting thing is that even though we saw sales decline, traffic actually grew by 2%. So again, people are more comfortable buying online, looking online, researching online, but that conversion has been a bit difficult given the macroeconomic factors, the product categories, the fact that stores are open. But I do want to point out that the share of mobile for traffic traffic is really high. I think sometimes we forget that when we're always at our laptops or desktops at work, but it really is a mobile first world when it comes to e-commerce around the world. And we see that share actually increase again as people are now commuting again, traveling again. I'm sure we all visited our family and friends in Q4 for the holidays, and that's when 76% of the traffic was coming to mobile devices, up from 72% in Q1. If we go to the next slide, just a great, again, benchmarking tool is that conversion rate globally was about 2%, very steady for the first 3 quarters, but then it does pick up in Q4 because of the holiday shopping season. People are very intentional about buying things online. So we saw the conversion rate go up to 2.1%. Everyone, I don't know about you, but I got a bunch of links from my family, and I just made the purchases from there for my family and friends. And so if we go to the next slide, the main sort of headwind that we're really keeping our eye on is inflation. So we did see the average sales price of an item is about $25 around the world. And it was pretty steady throughout the year, although it is much higher than it was even 2 years ago. I think the increase overall is about like 15 to 20%. So we are seeing higher prices. And that is really, I think, one of the reasons why we saw traffic be up, but sales down. People were researching, saw the price, and then didn't convert. And then I also want to point out that we saw discount rates pretty steady, 15 to 14% throughout most of the year is actually really low. It's not, we usually see discount rates a bit higher. So again, that holding steady on price, given all the inflation pressures that retailers and brands have, but it did pick up dramatically in Q4. And that is one of the reasons why we saw a less of a decline in sales that quarter. Was people really responded to a higher discount rate and were willing to spend that money. I'll also note, though, that even though the discount rate is so much higher, prices have stayed the same. So again, this compounding impact of inflation from the past 2 years means that you're offering maybe a 25% discount, but the price is about the same as it was last year or even 2 years ago because the price has increased over such a long time. And if we move to the next slide, this is a great, we talk a lot about social media being a great customer acquisition channel. It accounts for about 8% of traffic totally to websites globally, but we did see a decline in that by 3% for the year. However, I want to point out that it did recover in Q4. So it went from about 8% to about 9%. There's been a lot of issues around Apple's privacy implementation in April of 2021, which made it more difficult to do targeting and therefore drove up the price of social media advertising. But Facebook just reported its Q4 earnings. The cost per view had gone down in Q4, and they are confident that they're able to do better data modeling to make that targeting more efficient despite the barriers that Apple has provided. So we could be at a turning point when it comes to social media, that things have gotten better and will rebound when it comes to traffic going forward. And if we go to the next slide, it's really important when we think globally and internationally about payment types. They can be very, very localized depending on what people have grown up culturally. So here we're looking at the share of sales by different payment methods throughout the year. And there's some interesting trends that I'd like to point out. One is that credit card is gain share, right? People are probably under a little bit more pressure financially, and so they're turning to credit to do that. And so we saw that sort of increase throughout the year. PayPal is then the second biggest payment method globally, and it sort of shrank in share a little bit past the year. Then we have others. So again, like wire transfers, bank transfers. There's a lot of different payment methods that are popular in Europe that we don't break out, but they're there. And then the fourth sort of most popular payment method is buy now, pay later, but it might be there might be a shift back to those credit cards because the share of buy now pay later went from 7.7% in Q1 down to 6.8%, which is a pretty strong loss for a payment method. And one I want to call out that is the next one in that blue color is Apple Pay. It was too small to add the numbers, but Apple Pay was 3.7% of sales in Q1 and jumped to 5.5% sales in Q4. So we're seeing much greater adoption of Apple Pay from a consumer standpoint, but as well as a merchant one. And this has been a very strong growth story for this payment method throughout the world. So I think with that, I think that concludes my section.
Okay, Michelle, thank you so much for breaking that down. Michelle from Salesforce. I just want to call out, obviously, we're talking about, when we talk about payments, we're talking about how people are paying. And then we're also going to be talking today about how you get paid. And so that whole arc of payments. This is really interesting. And I think one of the things that I call out here is obviously the trends are aligned with inflation, the challenges there. Are there things that you're anticipating going forward that we should be looking out for?
I think going forward, it will be a year of efficiency and trying to be better operationally going forward. The consumer is under a lot of price pressure, even though inflation is easing. It's not deflation yet. So even if inflation becomes 0%, prices will still be higher on a 3-year stack than they have been. And so there's a long-term implication for that for the consumer. And it's not just products, right? It's services, it's housing, it's energy. So I think that's the thing, is really understanding what your consumer's spending capacity is, and understanding how efficient you can be to sort of hold the line on prices. That's sort of, it really is going to be kind of a sort of behind the scenes year for making sure you're operating as efficiently as possible, and not necessarily sort of trying new innovative like shopping experiences. As much as I'd love to talk about the innovation there, I think for this year it's more of a back end office year to get everything in line.